Thank you. Well, thank you so much for coming. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Layla Amon. I am the City of Manzanita's City Manager, and welcome you here tonight to our second edition of the Manzanita City Hall Town Hall. I just want to take a moment to kick us off, tell us kind of what the agenda is, introduce the team again, and then I hand it over to our architect. We've been, since we last met, we're literally at the drawing board. Well, I haven't, and that's probably for the best, but our architect, Chris, from Varying Architecture has. We got a lot of feedback from folks. I think about 70 people replied to the survey, so we digested all that information. And today we're going to walk through kind of the second phase of the project and kind of where we're at. So Chris is going to go through some of those materials, and we're going to hand it over to Jessie, who is our owner's rep. You may remember Jessie. She keeps us all organized and moving forward. And she'll be walking through a few slides, too, to get everyone up to speed on what are the key issues that came up in this feedback, which was transparency, trust, and understanding of what the budget is and how we're going to spend this money. So what Jessie's going to help us do is, as a team, really understand what a project budget means, what it looks like, what are all the things that are entailed in it, so that as we start to move into more detailed cost estimates, your level of understanding and education is also up there so that you can be participating at a higher level with us. And then Chris is going to go through several schemes. And then what we're going to do is, if you were here at the last town hall last week, we're going to do a similar exercise where you as a group at your tables, and we sort of purposely split you up so that you can hopefully meet some new folks, get some new perspectives, and talk through each of those schemes. And we're going to have you report back out some of the things that you went through in those different schemes, so pros and cons, and we have some materials that we'll pass out for that. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Chris to get us started. Thanks.
Great. Thank you again for coming. I know this is your evening, and we're happy to have you all here. Layla just kind of gave you this overview that I was about to do, but we're going to talk a little bit about what we heard last time. Just want to make sure that we're repeating back to you the things that we're hearing. As she mentioned, Jessie's going to do a brief overview about how we think about budget. We're going to talk a little bit about the investigations we're doing beyond drawing schemes and more about looking at the site and existing facilities. I'm going to kind of update you all on the building program. We've been working with the city and the police folks to kind of get that as tight as we feel like we can get it. And then we're going to review the options. We'll do this breakout session together, and we're going to ask one of you from each table to kind of come up when we're done and report out what your table had to say about the various schemes. So I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but we asked you basically 5 questions last time. The first one was about how do we establish trust in this process. We understand there's a history here that is not, let's say, less than ideal, right? A lot of what we heard, these were some of the highlights of what we heard. We went through pages of online surveys and all the stuff that we gathered here together. Really, it comes down to being transparent about being the information we're giving you guys is easily consumable and understandable. I think that's a really good point. We tend to talk in jargon sometimes. We're going to do our best to not do that. And when you find us doing that, please, remind us. Obviously, a real desire to look at very clear comparisons between reusing buildings and reconstruction, providing options, thorough cost estimating, comparing those apples to apples, and we're going to begin that today. I should say we just interviewed the CMGC teams last week. I think this week we'll have a final decision on that, if I'm not mistaken. And then we're going to wrap those folks into this process, and they're going to help us with the cost modeling piece of this. And, show me the money. That was the kind of the chorus that we heard over and over, and keep everybody informed. We are working on putting together all the materials we gathered last time online, which should hopefully happen shortly. We're going to do the same thing with each meeting that we have. So it'll be there for you guys to really dive into deeply if you'd like. We asked about what Manzanita's culture was like. These are the words that kind of kept reappearing. Welcoming, sensible, eco-friendly, artistic, but conflicted too was something we heard a lot. We asked what we thought a civic building really should be for a town like Manzanita. Simple, natural materials. A lot of people reference the bank and the library buildings as good examples. Flexible, space for the community, and for meetings. And then, what else could we use this site for? We've got way more site than we need for this building. There was kind of a clear consensus that the farmers market is well loved, and that's a good location for it. There seemed to be a real affinity for open space. This issue of workforce housing came up over and over again, so you'll see in some of our schemes there, we're starting to roll some of this stuff into these drawings. And then there's a question of emergency staging and evacuation sites. So those are kind of and then what is success, right? Well, the first thing is it gets built. And the last thing, and we know that has, been elusive to date, right? It needs to be on budget. It needs to be something you guys are all proud of, and it's going to last. And of course, it needs to meet the needs of people working. So I just wanted to we're going to do this every meeting. We're going to kind of report back what we did last time, just to make sure that everybody understands kind of where we're coming from. We're very serious about this process. If you see major things missing from these things as I report back, please don't hesitate to let us know. Like I said, we've got, 100 pages of comments from the online survey and all the stuff that we gathered last time. Obviously, it's it's on everybody's minds. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse here to talk a little bit about budget, and then we'll get into the fun stuff, the schemes. No offense, Jesse.
Thank you. I'm Jessie. I'm here to cover the unfun stuff of money. So my role as a project manager with the Clash Group, that means I coordinate all of the various contracts we have, from the architect to the contractor, all of the supporting stuff, really help represent the city's interests. And I also help with a lot of the budgeting. I make a lot of spreadsheets in my line of work. So I want to walk you through. We don't have any numbers yet. We have a couple schemes we're starting to look at. We don't have a contract on board yet. But I want to spend a little time talking about the components that go into a budget so that when we talk about numbers next time, you have a little bit more understanding of all of the different pieces and how they fit together. So the first part I want to talk about is hard construction costs, is a term we use a lot. What that means is all of the labor and materials it takes for the contractor to build this building. Okay, so it's all of your general contractor costs and all of your subcontractor costs. And we estimate that in today's dollars. What would it take to build this building today? That's our initial hard construction costs. And you'll see it often represented in like dollars per square foot now. There's a number of ways we can do that. So that's in today's dollars. We know we're not building the city hall today. And so let's say we start in a year, it's probably going to cost more in a year because of inflation. So then we add in some money for escalation, and we escalate to what we call the midpoint of construction, which is kind of an average way of saying we think we're going to spend this much money at this point in time. And so we do our best to estimate what we think inflation is going to be. All of that kind of makes up hard construction costs in the future, okay? And then on top of that, we're going to add in what we call design contingency. A design contingency is an amount where, as the design progresses, it gives us a little bit of flexibility for things we don't know. And so it allows the architect to say, oh man, we made an estimate or we made an assumption about this one piece and it turned out to be more difficult or challenging. And so it allows us to adjust to an evolving design without saying, oh shoot, now we're over budget. Okay, so this came up for me personally on a high school project. We were pursuing LEED certification, and as part of that, there was a new requirement in it that you have to do an acoustical study, and you can't do an acoustical study until the design's like pretty well set. All the walls are, you know where they live, you're about halfway through design, so they do this acoustic study, and the initial assumption by the architect was that all the walls could be 2x4 studs with insulation and a layer of sheetrock on each side. But what we learned from the acoustic study is that the walls either needed to be 2x6 or you have to add a whole extra layer of drywall. It was a big cost across a whole building, but we had design contingency. So we allowed the design contingency to kind of fill that gap of information we didn't know at the time we put the budget together. Nobody made a mistake. It was just part of a new code. We hadn't designed for it before, but we had this bucket of money, so we weren't over budget. So that gets us to all of the hard construction costs at the start of construction. As the architects learn things, we might need to kind of use parts of that design contingency. The design contingency gets like absorbed into all of the construction costs over the course of design. If we don't need it all, it just goes back to the city, right? We have it there just in case. Excuse me. Then we also have a construction contingency, and this is a little pot of money that the contractor can use for all of the unknowns and unexpected things they might run into. Let's say that taking the foundation took them a little bit longer to build than they thought, and now to get ahead of weather, they spent some money on overtime to erect the walls a little bit faster. It gives them a little bit of flexibility to adjust to the conditions of the project. All of that together is now what we call the GMP, so gross maximum price. That is the amount of money, the total construction contract. That is a number, and a construction contract will probably go to city council for a final vote where we say, this is it. This is the maximum this building is going to take for us to build, okay? On top, so this is, the GMP is a pretty, you're going to hear that a lot. Like I said, it's the total amount of the construction contract to build the job. On top of that, we have what we call soft costs. Soft costs includes everything else it takes to get this project done. It's my time, it's the architect's time, it's testing and inspections, it's all of the investigative work we need to do right now to verify the existing conditions, it's utility hookups, it's furniture, it's this, my little chart here is not to scale, it's a little difficult to do, but soft costs can be like 30, maybe 40% of the overall budget. So it's significant, but it matters. But it's outside of the construction contract. That's soft costs. All of that together now is a subtotal of all of our project costs. And then we hold one more contingency, and this is controlled really by the owner. Like, let's say we tell Chris in design, we need 2 data outlets per room, and then we're halfway through construction, something changes, and we realize, you know what, we really needed 4. That's a change. That's added scope to this project. And so that's where we might take some of this other contingency and move it into the construction contract to pay for a change after the contract has been set. All of these purple boxes, all of these contingencies are to mitigate our risk, right? If we hired a contractor tomorrow and said, build us a city hall, I don't want to see one single change order. They have to guess at what all of the risks are going to be, and their cost is going to be insane. You're not going to want to pay for it. So what we do is we evaluate all of the risks, and we right-size these contingency buckets to what we think the risk is of those things occurring. That's all very confusing. And then all of that added together is the total project budget. The total project budget is what we're going to bring to City Council. That's what has to get financed. That's the total cost to the city for this project. And then I added all of these terms over here. That's really everything I just described. All of these slides are going to be on the website, and so I added all these here so that you could refer back to this when we have future estimates. I'll probably move the slide back to show you, hey, when we quote you, when we're showing you a number, we're showing you this number right now, or this number, because it matters quite a bit. For example, this is a public project. It's important to this community. It's in news articles. People talk about it. It's out there, and there's a lot of comparisons to other projects. I was on another school project, and we're building 2 high schools that were about the same square footage. They had about the same budget. But when a reporter wrote an article about it, they quoted this number for one school, and they quoted this number for another school. And so I don't think they did it on purpose. I think they had weird information, and it's confusing. And you really have to know when somebody says, hey, this is going to cost $500 a square foot. Which one of these numbers are you talking about? And so in one news article, it made it look like the city was spending a lot more money on one school, and it just wasn't true. It was because they were putting the wrong numbers, okay? So it takes a lot of effort to dissect comparative costs to other projects. It takes, because you really have to know which one of these you're talking about to make an apples to apples comparison, okay? It takes a lot of effort. We put a lot of time into it. When we present data to you, we want to be really clear about which number we're talking about, so you have the full picture. Okay. Oh, look at this graph. I bet you weren't expecting calculus today. This lovely thing I like to call, actually it's not just me, it's the world, called the cone of uncertainty. And what that means is when we're early in a project like now, we're making a lot of guesses, we're making a lot of assumptions, and that can really make the cost vary widely. And so if we were to give you a budget right now, we have to add a lot for contingency because of all of the things we don't know yet. So this I randomly drew this line. This kind of represents where we're at now. We don't know a lot. Chris is going to show you some blocks on our drawing. That's all the information we have so far. If we did a cost estimate, it could have a lot of variety. By the time we bring it to the city council to vote, we expect to be about here. We're going to know a lot more. There's still going to be some variety. We'll still have a lot of design to get through, and our contingency buckets are going to be right-sized for the amount of information we don't know yet. The couple other things I want to point out is budgeting and estimating is an iterative process. The reality of our budget is probably going to go up, down, up, down, up, down for each cost estimate. As we estimate a scheme, realize, oh, that's too much, or that's not working, and then we're going to make some new choices and different designs to make sure that we're trying to get this into a budget where it needs to be. What else? Our estimating is going to become more accurate over time as we make more definition into the design. Covered this accurately comparing costs between different projects is complex. Writers asking some detailed questions about which part of the budget we're really talking about. The other thing I want to do is a quick update of some work we've done so far and what the next steps are. So Chris mentioned we interviewed our CMGC. Who knows what CMGC stands for? Yes?
Construction Manager General Contractor.
That's right. We're going to use the term, good job, gold star. We're going to use the term CMGC and contractor interchangeably because it means the same thing, okay? So we had our interviews. We should figure out who has the best score, and that's this week. And that's going to go to the City Council in November to approve their contract to start. We have a preliminary hazardous material assessment complete. So that's asbestos, lead, and mold. What we have to do next is really analyze it and figure out what that means if we're talking about renovating the buildings and start to really understand the difficulty and the cost of remediating those things. And we have to see if we need more testing. Do we need more information from that preliminary one? We think so. We don't know yet. We've also looked at the foundations and the concrete. We did a visual inspection where you can actually see parts of it are all chipped away and gone. We did a hammer test, which is a non-destructive test. The next step is to actually take some core samples. We have to try to locate rebar. The Quonset Hut, we don't have any information on the foundation. And so we won't know unless we go in and start drilling a bunch of holes. Similarly on the wood, the Quonset Hut has more exposed wood structure. You can see that some of it is rotten. What we don't know yet is it repairable, or do we just have to scrap the parts that are rotten? Similarly with the school, we know that there's dry rot in a lot of places, but we haven't really opened up a lot of the walls to know how extensive that could be. And then lastly, we have our geotechnical investigators started. So you may have seen a drill rig out on the site recently. They're going to take some more soil samples, put together a report, and that's going to inform a lot of the decisions about the structural capability of the existing buildings. I can take like a couple questions, but then we'll have to move on. Yeah.
So, if the city is fairly close to going to contract with the CMGC, what is the exact contracting method that's going to be used for the project?
It's a negotiated GMP, and so the contractor will go out. There might be some trades, like a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, for example, where we select those trades as a qualifications basis. And then other trades, they might get 3 bids and get low bids for. So we have to strategize that with the contractor. So it's based upon the eventual design scheme we come up with. It's based upon the subcontractor market, labor availability, material availability. Sometimes you want to get on board with your mechanical contractor early, just so they can order equipment and get it here in time, because it could take a year. So it's a negotiated GMP.
And
Yes.
GMP means
You got it. Gross
So
maximum price.
maximum price.
There you
Gross
go.
maximum
Go
price.
ahead.
Will this project trigger Davis-Bacon wages?
Davis-Bacon, no. Bowley wages, yes, which is kind of a Oregon's equivalent or so.
Bowley being.
One more guy.
Have the space requirements of the facility downstairs.
Oh, we're
Cover
just
that.
about to get into that. I'm going to let Chris take over. We can answer more questions, but we have a lot of material together, so I'd like to bring back some more questions maybe about the financial stuff at the end or even at the next meeting. That's okay? So, boom, we're going to get into the building spaces right now. Thank you.
That was a great segue. Thank you. This is kind of a high-level recap of what we've developed with the city and the police department of the building program. And it's broken out this way, you'll see momentarily, because the schemes that we're showing you are kind of just blocks, of these kind of footages for each piece. City offices, we've really gotten pretty tight, about a little more than 1,000 square feet. These are net square footages up here. Police department, about 1,400 square feet. There is a secure garage in addition to that they want to add to their piece. There's a number of shared spaces, a lobby, bathrooms, break room. We're at about 780 square feet for that. And then the council chambers room, which is kind of our big multi-purpose room that's going to take the place or be used in similar ways to this. We've got it sized for a capacity of 75 people. Also for the council work, of course, and then, it'll be a room that can be used either by the community or by staff when they need a larger space. So that gets us all to just a hair under 5,000 square feet. At the moment, we're carrying about a 20% grossing factor, and that, when I say grossing factor, these are the space allocations that we need for offices, etc. But we also need corridors, and there's thicknesses of walls that we need to carry to get to our gross square footage of building. So that's what that factor does. At this point, it's really just a kind of an educated guess on how much of that stuff there will be. It adds roughly another 1,000 square feet. So at the moment, our full building program is 6,000 square feet, including the garage itself. Any questions about that? I want to introduce a couple of things here before we get to the schemes that I think are going to be important to how you evaluate the schemes. There is a code requirement that is about where they essentially assign a category of risk to a building type or building size. They're 1 through 4. Most buildings that you go into are risk categories 2. It's a pretty standard average building construction. Some buildings have higher risk categories. And those are the buildings that would compromise essential services if compromised. Right? So risk category 4 is a thing we need to be thinking about because it does add cost, it adds complexity, and it adds to our, as we evaluate the existing conditions of the building, we need to keep this in mind. The police station, by code, will need to meet risk category 4. If we want the council chambers or the city hall itself to be functioning as part of the emergency management apparatus of the city, it will also need to meet risk category 4. Now, there's ways we can handle that. We can make the whole building risk category 4, or we can make the police station part of it risk category 4 and separate it, literally seismically separate it from the other parts of the building. What that means is essentially you build a second, it's by code considered a second building, right? This is important because as we start to lay the building out, that connection, that kind of seismic joint that we're talking about, is a complexity that we want to be thinking about. And probably in a scheme where we're reusing buildings, we're going to have a seismic joint between the police department and the old existing buildings. Because I don't think, not confirmed yet, we're going to need to finish our testing. It's going to be a very high bar to get the existing facility foundations to meet risk category 4. So it's something that we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about the facility. How much of it do we need to meet that emergency management piece? Okay, so now hopefully that's some of the fun stuff. I think everyone here is probably familiar with the site. Manzanita Ave here, the south division. The school building sits here with another wing in this direction, and you all know the Quonset Hut here and the ship. We're going to show you 3 schemes, as Layla said at the beginning. Then we're going to ask you guys to talk about them together and talk about pros and cons for each scheme. But we also want to talk a little bit about the whole site. This is something that came up a lot last time, right? Our building doesn't really need much more than a third of the site. Depending on how we configure it, it might grow a little bit, it might shrink a little bit. So what we're looking at in all these schemes, you'll see we've basically taken the top third for future workforce housing. Now, that's not part of this project. It's not being funded as part of this project. But it's really just, we wanted to put something on there as a kind of a placeholder to think about how we might use the site. And then there's another piece of this site that, based on the feedback we got, is devoted to open space for use as the farmer's market, for use as an emergency evacuation space for the town as well. So, not much of a diagram here, but you get the idea. We're starting to think about the full site, even though our project really is only going to live down here. Okay, this is the first scheme we're going to show you here. We're calling this the school reuse scheme. It's a little complicated, and hopefully it'll become clear as I kind of talk you through it. But what we're showing again is some future workforce housing at the north part of the site. The center part of the site becomes park, farmers market, future use of some type. In this scheme, we are locating the city and some of the shared spaces in the existing north-south wing of the school building. We're putting the council chambers in the large classroom that runs kind of east-west. We've separated out the police, both because we need the square footage, but also that the reason I brought up the kind of risk category 4 piece earlier, to sit here. And then we keep the Quonset Hut on the side, right? So we're really reusing almost all the school and the Quonset Hut. The dashed lines you can see here, zoom in, are what we're demoing in this scheme. The little lean-to off of the back of the Quonset Hut that we know, and the front part of the school, which presents some problems to us from an accessibility standpoint. This floor is 2 feet below the other floors. In order to get down there and to do it and follow ADA, we're going to need 24 feet of ramp plus landing. So we're talking about 30 linear feet at least of space. So we determined that maybe we can just lop that head off, put the lobby at the end here. And, we get a kind of a U-shaped scheme with a green space or plaza out front. The other piece that's important is the code is going to require us to have, we believe, 23 parking spaces, 23, 24. We're splitting that pretty evenly between what we're calling staff and police and public. And based on our conversations with the city and the police department, this kind of division makes sense. The city folks kind of like the idea that the lobby can oversee or at least see the parking lot that is for the public. A couple other things just to mention about how we've thought about the layouts. The lobby is going to be staffed by a city employee. We're not going to have a full-time person whose job it is to sit in the lobby, right? So that adjacency to the city offices needs to be right next to it, right? And they need to be able to go back and forth quite easily and not feel like they've been isolated from the rest of the staff. The police department ideally would also be right off that lobby, but we think we can create a corridor space that gets people back to them without too much trouble. And then the city council chambers, we're going to want to organize so that after hours, we can close off the bulk of the building, but keep the council chambers and the lobby and the public restrooms open for events just like this. So you'll see that kind of organization is kind of the baseline for each scheme. The shape of this box, that's going to evolve as we start to develop these floor plans more directly. But this represents the square footages that you saw earlier. In this scheme, we've got the Quonset Hut here remaining, as I said before. So pros and cons. I'm going to throw out a few for each one. I'm trying not to put our finger on the scale too much here, but just a couple of things to get you guys going, thinking as you're thinking about this. So pros: reuses the bulk of the school, right? It keeps the Quonset Hut for storage, and I think it makes a pretty nice public space out here, kind of a gracious entry to this new facility. Some of the cons. You'll see compared to some of the other schemes, it uses a bit more of the site. And as a result of all of this space out front here, there's going to be more site work involved. So there's potential cost of that. And then, we've got now all of this square footage, which is about our, what we're calling our 6,000-ish square foot building. But we've also we've kept the Quonset Hut in play, which on the one hand is great. On the other hand, are we going to do nothing to that in this scheme, or are we going to have to renovate it in addition to this? So that's just something to think about. Scheme 2, Quonset Hut scheme. In this scheme, you'll see it's a little bit more compact. It's a little more tucked up Manzanita Avenue. Rather than reuse the school and the Quonset Hut, it's really just reusing the Quonset Hut. Gives us a bit more site to work with when we're done. Puts the city and the police as wings coming off that Quonset Hut. Again, the same kind of relationship here where we have our lobby adjacent or close to the city, close to the police. There's some shared space as well. What we like about this is we get to start to take advantage of that kind of great tall space within the Quonset Hut for the city council chambers. In this case, we'd probably use that council chambers in the lobby, really take advantage of that height. In the interior, we might drop some ceilings in order to kind of reduce the volume. But again, our pros and cons, not yours. We're reusing the Q Hut. We've got a lot of site for future development, much larger kind of site footprint left. Like I said, takes advantage of the kind of existing kind of really tall, beautiful space that's in the Quonset Hut. On the con side, we've lost our storage, so we'll have to redevelop some storage on the site eventually. There is some complexity in dealing with this structure in terms of bringing it up to code, and particularly as we kind of plug into it with other volumes. So in this, this side, not so terrible, but this side where we're going to need a seismic joint, that's going to be a little bit more complex. But again, these are all things that we're weighing as we start to kind of look at the options. And the third scheme we're using is a fully new scheme. We're showing as a fully new scheme. In this case, we've got a fair amount of site left over. Again, we've left the future housing the same in each case, a little bit more compact into the street. Entry point kind of more on the corner, perhaps, with the lobby with the city and shared and the police and council chambers. Parking, public parking on the west, staff and police on the east. Okay, the pros in our mind for this is it's fairly compact, right? We can make this footprint really what we as efficient as we can. We don't, because we're not fitting program into an existing footprint. And as a result, we get a pretty nice, efficient perimeter to this building, right? Cons. It requires developing future storage. There is more demolition, and the reuse of these buildings then becomes limited to salvaging materials and reusing them if we can in this facility. So those are our three schemes. We're going to hand you each table a packet with these drawings that I just showed you and a series of prompts. What we'd love to get from each table is your own version of these pros and cons. Things that you like about schemes, things that you hate about them. Hopefully there's something about each scheme that you like, and probably lots of things about each that you don't like. If you guys can take those notes and as you talk together, and then we're going to ask one person from each table who's willing to stand up here to kind of report back what their table came up with. Does that make sense? Oh yeah, and at this point, I think we're going to break into our groups so that those of you joining at home, I think we're going to turn this off for a bit, and everything that comes out of this meeting will be posted online for your review shortly. No questions? Yes, sure.
One question is the white that appears in each drawing, are those enclosed spaces?
Are you talking about the hatch here, the white hatch?
The white in each of the three drawings,
yeah.
are those
I
enclosed
see what you're
spaces?
Yeah, they are.
Or
Yeah,
external?
they're essentially corridors, interior corridors.
Interior, okay, with cover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, but if you think it should be exterior, that's the kind of stuff we want to hear.
Right.
Right here.
Can you make a general statement about what evaluation has already been done on the existing buildings previously?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll go back to Jesse's slide there. We have done. Let's see. We are waiting on our geotechnical report. So they've done their boring, so we're going to find a lot about how good or bad our soils are. We have done. There was a report done in 2018 that did a structural assessment of the buildings. And there was another report done in February, is that right? 22, which was another evaluation of the foundations. And we have just got our first draft of the hazmat report. So that's going to, once we sort that out, that will help us understand a little bit more about how bad the mold problem is, how much asbestos is.
This level of evaluation hasn't been done before.
To my knowledge, only 2018 structural report is but only.
We've done a lot more since.
And as Jesse mentioned, we're planning on doing some more because, for example, as she said, we have no information about the slab at the Quonset Hut.
Right.
And we don't know what, the concrete mix and the rebar requirements in the 50s are very different from they are now, right? Depending on our geotechnical report, that may be a big problem or it may not be a big problem. So that's kind of what we're starting to sort through.
On the maps, when you talk about additional or the future storage space or any one of those.
Yeah.
I take it that's not the 600 square feet of secure garage? Okay.
Correct. That's not as part of this project. Perfect. Sorry. Did you have a question here? I get to everybody.
Yeah. The storage facility that you're talking about, is that primarily a police building?
We have a secure garage that is part of what we're proposing in the new construction. The future site storage, I believe, is more to do with emergency vehicles, city storage, etc.
Okay, and what level of construction does that have to meet? 1 through 4?
Good question. Technically, it depends on what you're parking. If you're parking in emergency vehicles in it, it's going to want to be risk category 4.
And I just want to be clear, that's not part of our project. What it is part of is sort of the larger site plan. So what we're doing is reserving future space for that, should we determine that we need to build a facility to house materials there.
Okay, so then we're talking about storage primarily for the police department, is that correct?
No. So that storage
That will be built
currently,
into here.
it's we have a number of emergency management supplies. Those are all stored actually in Connex boxes, which can be stored outside. And so they're currently residing in the Q Hut, but we wanted to look at the site as a whole and see if there's opportunity to build a facility on site at another phase of the project. So that's why in the schemes, maybe we can go back to when Chris, it's sort of a dotted line relationship because it's not part of City Hall. It has nothing to do with our police facility. That's its own piece. outline.
And it's not included in the square footage of the building then, the 6,000.
There's a 600 square foot secure garage for the police for storage and for their vehicles, and that is included.
Okay, that leads to one more question then. When do you anticipate that the cost for that storage facility that has to be provided is going to occur? And what timeline?
I don't know. It's on the horizon, but that would be something that city council would determine whether or not it's a priority. So right now the focus is on this. We have other places to store that material, and like I said, it's all in Connex boxes, which can be stored outside.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry, I'll get you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, scheme number one, the police is all brand new construction, correct?
Correct.
Every scheme.
Yeah, and each scheme, the police, because of that, we've put the police outside of the existing footprint of existing buildings because of the risk category.
And to that point, if you were just analyzing new construction only, do you have any rough order of magnitude of the increase to go from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4 in types of construction?
I can't provide that for you right now. We're going to get into that with our general contractor once they're on board. Basically,
but that ties directly into your final design.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the question of whether or not we're taking just the police facility to a risk category or the rest. So that will be part of the evaluation.
Part of the analysis.
Absolutely, yeah.
If it's 10%,
yeah,
it might be, let's build a really nice.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that, and that is going to be part of this process.
50%.
Then you're saying, right, and then if we are separated, then we need seismic joints, which complicates. So there's as Jesse was trying to say earlier, as you know, I think we're going to be getting into the weeds as we get further along here. But I wanted to introduce the topic now because I think it's important that they're just evaluating where we are. Anybody else?
I have two questions I'm curious about. One is all of the designs are in the same site of that big area, and I'm wondering why you did that. And the other, I can understand if you're reusing the buildings. And the other question is, are you considering solar energy?
Okay. First part of the question, the reason that we're showing them on part of the site that we're showing, I think is kind of twofold. One is, truthfully, the first two schemes obviously need to be there because of the existing buildings. But it's also where our utilities currently live, right? So we're trying to be efficient about site work, right? And I think there's a sense that Manzanita Avenue is probably a better front door for this facility than somewhere up on Division. So that's kind of where that decision was. But again, this is the kind of feedback that we're interested in. If there are people here that really think it ought to be on Division, we want to hear that. Right? The solar question is an unknown at this point. It's going to be, again, part of the design process, part of the cost estimating process. I think what we're going to want to do once we dial into a scheme that we're more comfortable with, as we get to one or two schemes that we're carrying, I think we want to start having conversations about priorities and what we're not going to be able to do everything from a sustainable standpoint, right? So what matters? Is it water? Is it solar? Is it, something else? We're going to hopefully go through that process with you all as well. So TBD, I guess, is the answer.
Are there?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I guess I was unclear as to whether in scheme one, with the use of the Quonset as storage, that requirement is being met in scheme one, but it's not being met, at least currently, in scheme 2 and 3.
Right. So it's not being given to us as a requirement to have the storage, but by reusing the building in this way, we don't need to tear this down. So the question that, you can do this very same scheme and take this away if you wanted to. There's going to be a cost evaluation as to if we're going to build this beautiful new facility here. My gut is we're going to have to put some money into the Quonset Hut too, or else it's going to feel very, disjointed. we'll start to see what those numbers are and then decide what its value is if this is our scheme.
Yeah. And 2 and 3 is
2 and 3.
possible future.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're
Do you have other examples of how Quonset huts have been used in other places? Or I'm just wondering the potential of a Quonset hut. You know, it doesn't look that great looking at it now.
Not at the moment, no.
So,
We can certainly bring some next time. What I would say about the Quonset hut, and again, this is the architect walking into that space, is it's pretty great space, right? And it's a space that we're not going to build if we're doing all new construction because it doesn't make sense to build that for this program type. So if we think that there's enough value there, and if we think it's manageable from a cost standpoint, then we love the idea of taking advantage of that space, be an amazing city council chamber, right? But, you know, like everything, there's lots of trade-offs.
How do we know as a group in our evaluation today whether the Quonset hut is even worth salvaging? It's 50 years old or more, and we're talking about building something that we want to last for 50 years in the future.
Right.
Is it worth considering? I don't know, as a citizen, is it worth considering the Quonset hut for another 50 years? Like, why would we consider option 2?
Right. Well, I think that's kind of our $1 million question here, right? There's definitely interest, it seems to us in the community, to reuse these buildings. What we're trying to do is facilitate a process here that gets us to a conclusion where there's some consensus around that. I think there's a lot of unknowns with the existing buildings. And when I mean there's costs associated with those unknowns, we're going to go through the process to try to reduce those unknowns and know those unknowns as best we can. So I guess my answer, maybe it's an unsatisfying answer, is if you think there's some inherent value in that building that you think is worth saving, it's all trade-offs, right? We're going to maybe put more money into that than we would put into something else, but we then get that space or we get to reuse that building. It's really a value judgment at some point. And we're going to give you numbers along the way to help you weigh those things.
I feel strongly that we have the wrong location for all of this, and it should be located on division. How do I articulate this in 1, 2, and 3?
I think
Cons. They're cons.
yeah, those are cons.
And
Yeah.
you should
And
talk about that in a group and write it down,
Yeah.
and it'll be good feedback. So,
Yeah.
it'll be great.
That's exactly the kind of stuff we're trying to solicit here. So because that's not something that we've heard yet, and if that becomes the consensus, then we're going to start moving these things around. So